December 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Now we come to Pearl Harbor. Dory Miller's battle station is in the wardroom, the officer's mess. His job literally is to make donuts so that when the battle's over, the officers can come down and have some donuts. Dory Miller says, you know, F that, I'm going up there where the fighting is. He goes up to the bridge, his captain is hit.
Great to see you. I say we just hop right in because I know we have a time limit, and let's dive right in here. Look at this, The Restless Wave. I absolutely loved this book. I had a smile on my face as I was reading through this. Usually for a podcast, because there's so many things going on, I read really quickly as I'm trying to do something for a podcast because I know I have to jump back into research as soon as I'm off and then get writing on my own books and that sort of a thing. And I thought, I don't want to do that to this book, but it's probably going to be that way. And I started reading, and right away, you had me. I just absolutely loved it. I want to talk to you about Hemingway. I love that he makes an appearance, a couple appearances. I want to talk to you about this amazing book. But first, which reminded me of some of my favorites, Winds of War, War and Remembrance, of course.
Yeah.
Loved those books. But let's get into this. As you were going through your time at the Naval Academy, did you think that one day you would write something, either fiction, nonfiction, historical fiction? Was that ever on your radar, or were you solely focused on making it through the academy and then being the best officer you could be?
I'd flip it and say, you know, when you were going through BUD/S, did you think you would end up writing books about SEALs? And probably not. Probably not.
Well, I kind of did. I knew that I would write after my time in the military because I was such a reader growing up, which, by the way, in this, I loved how you made the mom the reader and her the influence on your character for his background in of reading, which lays the foundation for most everything else. So actually I thought they would be distinctly different parts of my life. That one would be military, and then one would be writing. And it would be writing thrillers, the same kinds that I read growing up, of course, supported by all the nonfiction that I read as well. But I thought of them as distinctly different things. I didn't think there would be the overlap as there is. And the overlap was surprising to me in that it is not what happened during deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, but more so the feelings and emotions behind what happened, because then I can weave those into a completely fictional narrative. But I'm taking from your background that, were you a reader beforehand, just like your character?
Oh gosh, yeah, Jack. The reason I came to reading is an interesting one. My dad was in the military, and he got assigned to Athens, Greece in the 1960s. He was a Marine, but he was the naval attaché. Here's the trick. In Greece in the 1960s, there's no television. So I'm like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And so my outlet became reading, and I became a huge reader. And also, just like in my novel, The Restless Wave, the mom is the reader. Same in my household. My mom was an inveterate reader. Somebody who is, by the way, my mom is 94. And I said to her the other day, she's 94. I said, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to Budapest for a few days." She said, "Oh, let me tell you my two favorite Hungarian novelists." I mean, 94.
Wow.
She is the ultimate reader. And I inherited that from her. So to answer the fundamental question, I never thought of myself as writing fiction. I kind of had an idea that I might write about the oceans and leadership and many other things that I have written about. But I came late to writing fiction, did it with a mutual friend of ours, Elliot Ackerman. And this is my first solo turn as a novelist. So I feel like in Pinocchio, I'm a real boy now.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic, and I love that you left some room to move to maybe give us another one at the end.
Jack, I'm under contract for 5.
Oh, fantastic!
So
I love hearing
yeah,
that.
I mean, I'll never catch up to Jack Carr, but my project is 5, and it'll be the first one is the first half of World War II, the Restless Wave. Second one, working title, is For Those in Peril, also a phrase from the Navy hymn. That'll take us to the end of World War II. Number 3, Korean War, a war that is really underrepresented in literature. Number 4 is the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, kind of set piece. And number 5, Jack Carr, your world, is going to be Vietnam, riverine warfare, Navy SEALs in the early days.
Oh, yes.
So that's the arc of our protagonist's life, and I'm very excited about what comes along.
Wow, that is fantastic. I love that. Of course, Vietnam being a watershed moment in special operations history, in particular for the SEALs.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about that. Were SEALs called SEALs in the early days in Vietnam? Or were they, at one point they were special or frogmen, or what's the...
Frogmen is kind of the overarching slang term from World War II, probably pre-World War II, up to today even. And team guys, of course, somewhere along the line, team guys came in. I'm not sure where that is, but after this conversation, I'm going to go ask someone at the UDT SEAL Museum about when team guys first became part of the acumen. But of course, we had the naval combat demolition units in World War II.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Yep. The OSS had a maritime unit as well. Of course, Scouts and Raiders plays in to things. Yeah. And then, of course, in is it 1962, January, is that right? When it was started beforehand, President Kennedy gets credit for it, but it was really already coming because obviously that's early on. And that's when we get the first 2 SEAL teams commissioned that are actually called SEAL teams, although they were going over the beach in Korea, as I'm sure you know, but they became actually SEALs in 62.
Yeah, they'll be well represented in this. I'm very excited to get to that book and tell that story. And here one of my models will be someone you may know, retired Admiral Bob Natter, who was a Silver Star recipient in riverine craft and worked with the SEALs. He's good friends of a number of SEALs that you would know from that era, people who are huge in your community. And he is helping me understand and study that Navy riverine connection to the actual SEALs in those boats. So I'm hoping to write it as an extremely authentic piece of writing. I'm also going to be in touch with former Governor Kerry, Medal of Honor recipient, a number of others who were in those wars. I think it's a fascinating part of the Navy story.
It really is really a pivotal point for our special operations community, but also Army Special Forces as well.
Yes.
Some of the CIA paramilitary type units, both on the air and ground. But in this one right here, the new 1911X from Sig Sauer, a balance of classic 1911 engineering and style with modern upgrades, including an ultra-low profile direct mount optic capability designed for the new Romeo X red dot optic. X-ray 3 day-night sights for extreme sight picture visibility, an adjustable flat blade trigger and custom G10 grip panels from LOK Grips. Designed with a full 1913 rail and stainless steel frame with undercut trigger guard, an extended ambidextrous manual safety and slide stop, chambered in classic 45 ACP. Sig Sauer 1911X. Classic design meets modern innovation. Introducing the new Jack Carr BCM Mod 4 grip. Reduced angle for improved ergonomics and trigger control. New aggressive grip texture to maximize traction. Extended forward tang to close the gap between the trigger guard and pistol grip. High-rise beaver tail style backstrap. Open bottom to minimize weight. Includes mounting hardware for mil-spec lower receivers. Manufactured in the USA from high-quality impact-resistant polymers. Go to BravoCompanyUSA.com and get yours today. I mean, I love historical fiction. I think because I learned so much about history by reading historical fiction as I was growing up, or even reading fiction, even reading thrillers where there would just be a line about something that told me I should know about this. I understand what the author is saying here just by inference from how it's used here in this paragraph, but I don't really understand the historical background to it, and I should. This author is kind of letting me know here that I should, even though I'm 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And then I'd go off and research on my own. I'd go to the internet of the time, which was the World Book encyclopedias that we had on our shelves, which I'm collecting now. I'm trying to get every decade, a really nice collection from like the 20s all the way through the 90s. Wow. Or whenever they stopped doing them, probably in the early 2000s. But so I can go back and see how things historically were framed by different decades. That was the internet of the day, of course. But I loved that. And so that's why as soon as I started reading this, I mean, you had me with the mom being the reader. You had me with Hemingway and his the women around him, the boxing, playing cards, Florida, fishing, all those things, all those guy things that are so wonderful to foundational elements of someone who's going to follow this path. I thought that was fantastic. Did you have the Harvard classics growing up? Did your mom have those in the house? You did.
I did.
Wow.
I have a beautiful leather-bound set, and it's not a first edition, but it's a very early edition. And they're foundational in my library. I have about 5,000 books at home. Wow. And I'm a serious collector. I have every first edition of Ernest Hemingway, 3 of them signed.
Wow.
And so I love books, but Harvard Classics for our listeners, 50 volumes. And the idea of the Harvard Classics was to distill a Harvard education into 50 books that you could read and get the heart of what it would be like to attend Harvard. One of the early presidents of Harvard came up with the idea, and it had to fit on a 5-foot shelf, and hence the 50 books.
Interesting. Did they have additions over time? Didn't they add one or two?
They did, but they were very seldom changed. The additions really were packaged slightly different. They were indexed slightly different. The one I have is from the 1940s, and it's just a beautiful set of books.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, you reminded me of those. I've been well aware of them for some time, of course, but I don't have them. And for some reason, I got too busy. I remember a long time ago wanting to track them all down, and then I got busy. I think it was when I was in the SEAL teams, or probably right before. And then things just got busy, and then your book reminded me of them, and I'm going to track them down after our conversation right here and add them to my library as well.
You can buy the complete set, and you should shop around on the different editions. And they're not super inexpensive, but they're very affordable. I would say probably a little bit more than buying a World Book Encyclopedia set.
Yep. No, I need to add those to the collection for sure. And speaking of Hemingway, I'm not sure you know this or not, but I found out about it in, I think it was late 2019, and then early 2020, one of Hemingway's managers during his later years, the same guy who started Newman's Own with Paul Newman, part of that circle back in the day there, he passed away, I think at age 100 and something, but all of his Hemingway stuff went up for auction, and a fan got me the typewriter that he wrote A Movable Feast on. It's incredible. It's up in my library / office.
Oh, that's a huge, obvious keeper. When I was Commander of U.S. Southern Command, so I'm in charge of all military operations south of the United States, part of my command was Key West, where there's a big intelligence center and our center of our counter-narcotics, GIATF South, you know it well. But also in Key West is the Hemingway house.
Sure.
The one he lived in and is featured in in this book, in The Restless Wave. So I would go down there from time to time, and like you, I'm a huge admirer. And at one point, the staff there said, "Hey, Admiral, we're pretty sure Hemingway got a Bronze Star while he was in World War II, but we can't find it. We can't find the documentation for it. Could you help?" Well, there's one good thing about being a 4-star admiral. You can kind of dive in where you want to in the U.S. military. So I won't drag you through all the puts and takes. We found the actual citation. It's a true thing. He was the recipient of a Bronze Star. So, Jack, the next time you're in Key West, go to the Hemingway house and you'll see his framed Bronze Star citation, an actual Bronze Star, which I got it. And I'm very proud. Down at the bottom, a little brass pack. Thank you to Admiral Stavridis.
No kidding. That's amazing. I went there for the first time, not this past summer, but the one before. But I was with my family. It was very rushed, so I didn't get to spend too much time there. But when did that go up? Was it there when I was there, summer of 2023?
Yeah, this would have been about 10 years ago when I was Southcom. And here's the thing that reminded me that you said about the typewriter. As you know, but for your listeners, Hemingway had like a separate kind of annex off the house where he wrote, almost like a tree house. It's over on top of a separate building. You walk across a catwalk to get over to it. But there's one of the original typewriters. Normally, they won't let anybody like actually touch it. They let me actually sit down and type on it. So I have a piece of paper typed that came out of Hemingway's typewriter. That's as close as I can get to you having an actual typewriter of this. That's
fantastic. That's what I typed one sentence on mine, and it was a Hemingway sentence, and then I left it sitting right there. So that's what's on mine. And I did not know when we talked previously that you did the Hemingway writer in residence in Idaho. You were up there.
I did, and you should do that. You should do that, and we can help figure out how that would work. But I was the writer in residence at the Hemingway house in Ketchum, Idaho, where, as you know, tragically, he committed suicide. But his wife, his fourth wife, Mary, left the house when she finally left the house a decade or more later. She left everything exactly the same as when Papa Hemingway was there. So when you go, you see his markings on the wall next to the light switches, so he knew where to cut the power. You can see his shopping list. All of his clothes are there. It's just incredible. And what you can do if you're the writer in residence, you actually stay in the Hemingway house. They let you stay there, I think, up to 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And I stayed there, Jack, as I was finishing The Restless Wave, and I literally went back and rewrote parts of it because I could kind of feel Papa Hemingway floating around there. It's amazing, and I'd be glad to help you make that connection.
Thank you. I would love that. Oh my gosh.
It's a deal.
I was aware it existed, but I didn't know that. For some reason, I thought it was like a year, or I didn't know, or like what stage. Anyway, I just wasn't aware of the specifics, but I knew that it was up there.
Yeah, because neither you nor I have a year to go live in Ketchum, Idaho, right?
You're right.
But to go for a week or even 2 weeks, and maybe combine it with some fly fishing or hiking or skiing, whatever your deal is, I think it's really worth it.
Oh, wow. I'm going to hit you up on that for sure. That would be incredible. And I loved how you tied him to his father through the sea, through the fishing. He got things from his mother and his father. I connected with that immediately. Cards, boxing, Hemingway, of course, the bar where I've been down there in Key West.
Sloppy Joe's.
Yeah, exactly. Love it. I love the beer, and you even got the beer that Hemingway liked, and then him making the daiquiris and pouring for everyone. Martha Gellhorn, of course. I love that she makes an appearance in there. What a character she is.
She's a huge character. Just to hit pause on her for a second, you can't just glide by Martha Gellhorn. So Hemingway cruises along. He has a lot of women in his life, but he's married during this period in the book in the late 30s to Pauline Pfeiffer, who's kind of a more traditional woman, I suppose you'd say. Martha Gellhorn is unbelievably untraditional. She's a war correspondent, probably got more time in combat than certainly than Ernest Hemingway. And she is someone who is fearless and bold and takes men when she wants them and discards them when she wants to. And she's beautiful. She's tall, striking, blonde. And of course, Hemingway falls madly in love with her. It's mutual, and they have an affair, and then they roar off together to the Spanish Civil War. She's a real piece of work in every dimension.
She really is. I have some books by her and about her in the library. But yeah, what a fascinating character. I keep meaning to take a breath and really take some time and dive into those. I think I bought, maybe 5 to 10 different books, possibly about 3 or 4 years ago, by her and about her. And at some point I'll dive into those because what a character, as you explain here, and you weave her into the story. And I absolutely love when books do that. Not many do. That's why the ones that stand out to me are the ones that do that, because someone else might not know who these people are or whatever. So maybe other authors, either they're not aware or they don't see the value in doing that, or publishers or editors don't see the value. I don't know. But I love doing that in my books, even though they're quite different from historical fiction. I would put this in the historical fiction category for sure. And I love doing that as well, having little guest appearances for people that maybe less than 1% of people might catch it. But in this case,
I think that's a really important point, is the temptation, certainly in historical fiction or in any fiction, is to take some famous character and just randomly kind of plug them in the story non-organically, just park them inside there. The trick, as you do so well in your books, and I hope I've done that in The Restless Wave, is, as you say, kind of weave them into the story in a way that kind of fits and makes sense. And what I want is what you just said. I want the reader to put down my book and say, man, I want to learn more about that Martha Gellhorn. She is interesting.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is the trick.
It's fantastic. You do that so well here. And then Plebe Summer, you move us into Plebe Summer in The Restless Wave. I love the cover, by the way. But you move us into Plebe Summer. I wanted to ask you about your Plebe Summer. What was that like, showing up at Annapolis and moving into this this machine of churning out officers? And what was that like for you?
Oh, it was horrible. And I would think, Buds would be pretty tough. I know Buds is tougher than the Naval Academy, but for me, the Naval Academy was really hard. 1972, it's like a drenchingly hot, and it's just PT and screaming and yelling. And in those days, the upperclassmen could push and hit and slap and put all kinds of insane sanctions on you. And it just went on and on and on from like 4 o'clock in the morning till midnight. It was just, just hell with onions on it. It just kind of kept going and going and going. And it, as you know, the idea of these military things is to push you to almost break you down, but to then pull you back stronger. And that's what it did for me. But it was 65, 70 days of incredibly difficult times.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've never been a proponent of hazing at all, but I do like the new guy type things where you have to prove your value and prove you want to be there and do kind of new guy tasks and that sort of thing. Prove yourself to the people to your right and left. But I can only imagine what it was like back in the 70s or prior, even into the mid 80s, late 80s, I guess. But
the other, Jack, you'll appreciate this from the teams. The other message of Plebe Summer, you just hit it, is look to the right, look to the left. It's bonding together that class. In my case, the class of 1976. We started with 1,300. We graduated 800. So high level of attrition, not like a SEAL initiation, but very high attrition, probably 35% attrition. By the time you get through all that, you are bonded. And as you and I both know, on a battlefield, the opposite of fear is not courage. The opposite of fear is love. Love for the man or the woman to the right and the left of you. You stand with them. That's what I learned at my Plebe Summer.
Interesting. That's one of the themes that is fairly prevalent in the show that we just finished filming, actually over in Budapest. We just wrapped it a couple weeks ago, and it's a prequel to the events of The Terminal List, my first book. But that right there that you just articulated is one of the themes that people should recognize.
That comes from the ancient Greeks, and a wonderful book that sort of unpackages it based on the 300 Spartans and the Battle of Thermopylae is called The Gates of Fire.
Oh, yes.
I know you've read it.
Oh, yes.
And it's historical fiction. And that line, the opposite of fear is not courage. The opposite of fear is love, is from King Leonidas, the leader of the 300 Spartans.
Wow, by Stephen Pressfield, who's now a dear friend, was an
He's
inspiration to me for
amazing
years.
writer.
And what a great guy, incredible guy. I was just with him about a month ago or so at his house in Malibu. We got to link up and hang out for a bit there, and I got to see where he writes and all of that. So that was
very cool. I'm a huge
fantastic.
fan of his books.
I will let him know. He will appreciate that. I'll text him as soon as we're off and let him know. He will very much appreciate that. And you were the 1976. That's the bicentennial class. And you in the book here you weave in a cheating scandal. And I remember reading about one, I think it was right around the time I came into the military. So in the late 90s, I think there was a class that had something going on as well. Did something like that happen in your class?
Yeah.
Or, wow.
Yeah, that is based on true event. And periodically at the service academies, there's a cheating scandal. And as you know, the service academies have very simple honor codes. Midshipmen or cadets at West Point will not lie, cheat, or steal. It's pretty simple. And we don't tolerate those who do. And occasionally, I'd say every 10 to 20 years, there's a cheating scandal. And then it breaks down, as you see in the book, The Restless Wave. You see the backbiting, the turning others, it tends to go badly. And it's not a pretty sight. And the protagonist of this novel, Scott Bradley James, loosely based on a couple different classmates of mine who had a similar experience, shall we say, of being on the wrong side of that. And it gets in a person. And I try to kind of convey all that. And that's really part of the theme here, is that the young man here is very unformed. He makes mistakes. He's flawed. Yeah. And, we think, I think correctly, of the greatest generation. This is a story of that generation. The greatest generation are brave and true and lion-hearted and saved the country. All those things are true. They were also young. They made mistakes. I'd invite anybody to think back on yourself in your 20s. Did you make a mistake or two? I think probably we all did. And I wanted to kind of capture that. And I'll close on this with a quote, Jack, from one of the greatest members of that generation, and that would be President Bush Sr., who was one of the youngest Navy pilots in the Second World War, famously shot down, rescued miraculously by a U.S. submarine that happens to surface right before he's going to get captured by the Japanese. Looking back, decades later, on his role in World War II, President Bush said, "I was young, but I was willing. I was scared, but I was ready. I had barely begun to live when I began to see men die." I thought that was a pretty good line about how young, scared, but they were willing and they were ready.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. I was actually kind of surprised how human you made the protagonist in here. Yeah. So that as I went through, that stood out to me. He is flawed. He's learning from his mistakes, but he's like anyone else you might be or be friends with. So that really humanized him to us.
And that's thank you. That's exactly the point here, is to grab this character early. We meet him first when he's like 16 years old. We're going to follow him through these 5 novels until he's in his 50s. And every human learns and grows and changes and makes mistakes, hopefully improves. And that's part of that trajectory. And this is only the first book. So yeah, there's some mistakes and some flaws in there.
Yeah, no, I love it. Something we're not very good at is taking those experiences of the past and those lessons and turning them into wisdom going forward at the geopolitical level. And I think why this character is going to resonate with so many people is because he's doing that. I try to do that with the character in my novels, just not have him be a cardboard cutout who just now saves the world from nuclear disaster or biochemical disaster or whatever it might be. But he is learning from past mistakes and then applying them to future problem sets or present problem sets as in the form of wisdom.
I think you do that beautifully. And what makes your novels work as a trajectory is precisely that when I read your novels, I feel like I know him, and I feel the immense pain of his origin story, if you will, in the terminal list. And yet you see him working through it and growing and learning. And that's, I hope, what we'll see in this 5-book series that I'm embarked upon.
Yep. Thank you. Cause I thought it would be, when I got to the end of this one, I'm like, oh, there'll be one more. But I didn't realize that you had a grander vision. I should have suspected, you being you, that there is a grander vision, which is fantastic. And then I love, you get to Hawaii. We meet up with Hemingway again. And we have an Indian motorcycle on there, which I love, of course, as well. And did you ride, or do you ride, or was that for the character?
I do not. That took a lot of research on my part to figure it all out.
If you had told me you ride, I was going to be surprised. And I don't know why, but I was going to be. Yeah. But I love that it's in there.
No, you can put on the bumper sticker, "Admirals don't ride."
That's kind of what I was thinking. But I love that it's in there. That was fantastic. And then we have the Doolittle raid. So you bring us through that. Of course, Pearl Harbor, through there. And I couldn't help but be reminded of the Best Defense Foundation. I took my daughter out to the 80th anniversary commemoration events of Pearl Harbor. We had 62, I think it was, World War II veterans that we brought back, and you're assigned to a veteran, getting them in and out of their wheelchairs to and from the events, making sure they're taking their medicines, that they're eating, because it's not just one day, it's multiple days of different events out there. Same thing with Normandy, and we've done both. But we met Jack Holder, who has now since passed away, over the age of 100. He was on Ford Island as a very young, I think 18-year-old mechanic at the time, working on the PBYs, which you have in the book as well.
Yeah, Catalina's.
Exactly. I saw that. I lit up when I read that. But he told us the story in person. So me and my daughter was 15 or 16 at the time, and he takes us, shows us the bullet holes that are still, not the holes, but the divots in the ground on the runway. They kept some in the hangars, as you know, out there in the area in the vicinity of Pearl Harbor. Kept that history alive, essentially, and showed us where he was working on the plane, where he ran outside, looked up, where he saw the Japanese planes, jumping into what was then, when we were there, it was just a dried up ditch, but at the time it was a sewage ditch back then in 1941. Shows us where he went, dove into that, jumps up, runs to the water's edge, runs a couple hundred meters down the runway, I think it was, and watches these planes bank, turn, and drop some of the first torpedoes, bombs on Pearl Harbor. So
one of the characters in the book is another true person, and that's John Finn.
I was going to ask you about him. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, let's talk about John Finn, because it parallels perfectly the story you just told. So John Finn is this crusty old Asia hand. He's been on, think, sand pebbles, kind of boats in the Pacific and the Asiatic fleet. Now he's a chief petty officer. He's up on the North Shore at Kaneohe when the attack comes, and he leads a kind of a pickup team out to a small embankment, gets a machine gun, and actually shoots down a Japanese Zero, which is pretty hard to do from the ground with a 50 cal machine gun, believe me. And so John Finn becomes a Medal of Honor recipient, one of the very first Medals of Honor in the war, because all that happened obviously on 7 December 1941. The reason I wanted to pull him into the story is a kind of a personal note. I met John Finn and got to know him, and my wife is the ship's sponsor for the USS John Finn.
Wow.
She broke the champagne bottle to christen the ship John Finn. He lived to be 100 years old.
Amazing.
And they really were the greatest generation.
No doubt about it. And going back to to Jack Holder, who I mentioned earlier, he then went on to become a pilot. And he goes to the Pacific, and he sinks one with that same aircraft, which is
Catalina.
Catalina. Sinks one Japanese submarine, I believe it was, and then helped sink a Japanese aircraft carrier. Then they send him to the English Channel. They send him to over there, and he helps or sinks on his own a Nazi submarine. Incredible.
And his name is Jack
Holder.
Okay, so because I'm almost done with the second volume, which takes us to the end, I guarantee you Jack Holder, and I'll get his true story, I'll get everything right, will appear in the second book, Jack
Amazing.
Holder. Yeah,
Amazing.
and I'm gonna put him alongside John Finn,
Wow.
and we should check with Jack Holder and see if he met or knew Chief John Finn. I've got to think, as that number of Pearl Harbor survivors dwindled, he must have known John Finn.
I would think. So he passed away, I think 2 years ago now. I think at
I'm
age
going to
101,
find out.
102.
I'll figure it out.
And I don't think he talked about his war experiences till the early 2000s, I think it was. I think that's what he said. Then he started recounting these stories, and then he documented them. So he did have a book out, I think a self-published one. I have it here. I'll make sure you get it. And my daughter's read it now, and just amazing. But it's not uncommon for many of these guys to not have talked about those experiences till much later in life. It seems
totally. And you know, one thing I've discovered in writing this book is now that people know I'm writing about World War II, people talk to me all the time about, you know, my Uncle Bill, my cousin Jerry, here's what he did in World War II. And I'll try and follow up and try and put as many of these real characters into the book. But what I find again and again is, oh, he didn't really talk about it that much.
Yeah.
And I wish all of them would have told us all of their stories. A handful did. But it's important that those stories, and you demonstrate this so well in your books, this becomes part of the DNA, part of the culture of, in your case, the SEALs, and in the case of Restless Wave, the U.S. Navy broadly. And I think it's so important. So you and I ought to be encouraging people to be telling and talking and writing and telling their stories.
There's something different about hearing it. And now, luckily, through some of the technologies we have available today over the last decade or so, some of these are captured in podcasts, recorded interviews. Of course, they are before as well, but now the medium is so much more available to people because anyone can log on and access a lot of these interviews. But I'm so forever thankful to the Best Defense Foundation for allowing my daughter to have talked to these guys, for her someone from her generation. And they've never really brought a younger person on. They only did it as a favor to me. And then they saw that generation talking to her and how she was just so engaged and how they just lit up telling her these stories. And for some reason, that age difference, someone at 100 years old and someone at 15, 16 years old, there was just this amazing connection. So now they have a high school program where they bring high school kids out on every one of their programs to get as many high school kids as they can. And that's because of how my daughter interacted with these guys at Pearl Harbor. And then she's been to Normandy twice, just got back from the Netherlands. And now she's a history major, and she's headed back to Europe this summer to go to some other World War II sites back there and continue her studies. And it's all due to hearing these stories from these guys themselves.
Jack, have you taken her, I'm sure you have, to the World War II Museum in New Orleans?
Not yet, but it's on our list. Yes.
Oh, gosh.
I know. I need to go down there.
Based on what you just said, you ought to stop everything you're doing and fly to New Orleans. It's an amazing museum, and it's the 4th most visited museum in the United States.
Wow. Yeah,
Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian, Field Museum in Chicago, number 4 World War II museum in, of all places, New Orleans. And they have many, many things, but to include these capsules you can step into and be there with these veterans telling their stories. It's beautifully done. The whole museum is just incredible.
I've heard that, and I need to get down there. My co-author on the Beirut book, Targeted Beirut, works with them on programs, and I've got to get down there. It's certainly on near the top of the list. And before, I don't want to look at time and very cognizant of your time, but you take us through the first part of the war here. And what I love also is that things that we all should know about, some of these names that we all should know, or names that we heard, or we remember from high school history or college history, or maybe some other books we read, that those all come to life here in the pages of the Restless Wave. And so we hear about Yorktown, we hear about Spruance, we hear about Nimitz, we hear about Fletcher, we hear about Halsey, hear about Yamamoto on the other side, and we hear about what happens at Guadalcanal. So all of these things are in there. Halsey's in there, 5-star Admiral. I wanted to ask you about that. And then, of course, Arleigh Burke. I want to make sure we don't lose time here because you met him. Is that right?
I did. When I was in my 30s, headed out to my first command at sea, the ship I was taking command of, Jack, was an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Mine was the second of the class, named after John Barry, who was a Revolutionary War admiral. But 4 of us were in the pipeline to take command of these Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. So we were privileged to go spend a couple of hours with Arleigh Burke. And it was just like you were describing. I think at that time, Admiral Burke was probably in his late 80s, early 90s. And he just told stories about Savo Island, the battles around Guadalcanal, for example, really stayed with me. And then I wove many of the things he talked about on that day. And then I had 2 other meetings with him, longer story, but I got to know him reasonably well toward the end of his life. And yes, he's a very real character. And in the second volume, which I'm working on now, he has an even larger role.
Wow, I love that. I love how you have personal touch points with him and others. It's incredible.
Can I throw out one other character? You mentioned a whole bunch of wonderful.
Let's go back and talk about some of these guys.
Well, the one I want to make sure we have time to talk about is Dory Miller.
Yes, that was in my list to talk to you about for
perfect.
sure.
All right,
yes.
Take it. You take it anywhere you want to go, as long as we get to Dory Miller. It's
yes, let's finish
story.
On Dory Miller. I love that that story for sure. But Yorktown. Let's talk to us about Yorktown and then the significance of what happened with the Yorktown and the battle surrounding the Yorktown.
Sure. Yorktown is one of the carriers that escaped Pearl Harbor. U.S. Had 3 carriers that were out at sea. And of course, all the battleships, which is what we thought of as the beating heart of the Pacific Fleet, they were all sunk or so badly damaged, they were knocked out of the war for a year or 2. But luckily, the 3 carriers were out at sea, including USS Yorktown. And so now we flash forward 6 months after Pearl Harbor. We go to the Battle of Midway. This is Admiral Raymond Spruance's greatest hour. And the Midway is one of the 3 carriers that helps win this epic, pivotal battle in the early days of the war. And then is herself torpedoed. They fight to save her. They try to fix her. They get her back. And then finally she sinks. It's amazing, inspirational, and really the Battle of Midway and the Yorktown is just a fundamental myth, a mythology, a cultural touch point of the U.S. Navy. That's the story of Yorktown.
Just incredible. And I know we've talked about this before, because one of your other books features Pappy Boynton and Corsairs. The one you wrote with, the first one you wrote with Elliot Ackerman.
Correct.
And my grandfather was killed off Okinawa in 1945. He was a Corsair pilot, Marine Corsair pilot.
You were. I just have to hit pause. I'm literally on that page in the second book. I am literally describing a Corsair pilot, talking about the aircraft itself, Marine pilot, of course, close air support. This character is named John Allen. Wow. Who was this? Your grandfather?
Yeah, my grandfather. He didn't make it back, so the only grandfather I really know is my step grandfather. But I grew up with the silk maps that they gave Marine aviators and Navy aviators back then, because if obviously you had a paper map and you hit the water, it would disintegrate. But you had silk maps, as you know. And I had his wings. I had his wings. I had his medals. Wow. Pictures of him and his squadron. Black and white photos of him standing on that wing of that Corsair. Another one with him and his squadron in front of a Corsair with him, the pilots, the mechanics, everybody all lined up. I have that.
I love it.
Pictures of him and his wife at the time, and how young they were back then, and those old black and white photos.
Send me, Jack. I mean, just send me an email with just a paragraph of what you just said.
I sure will.
His full name, all that.
I sure will.
And he will be woven into this novel. And that's exactly this. Is what I love to do, is find an actual person and put them into it. I'm going to put it next to my fictional Marine pilot, a guy named John Allen, named after General John Allen, who's a classmate of mine from Annapolis. But I'd love to put your grandfather in this story, standing next to him. Send me a little paragraph about all that.
I will. Thank you so much. And as you know, there were 2 kamikazes that hit the Bunker Hill on May 11th of 1945. Creeping up on the end of the war, though they
Yep.
Maybe not. Maybe they weren't also sure of that. I'm not positive, but he was in the ready room, and that first kamikaze is probably the one that got him. So he's listed as missing in action because they never found the body. Because
Wow.
from my research
Yeah.
anyway, he was right
Jack,
there below
I'm
decks.
literally writing that story right now, and people don't appreciate. I'll give you two numbers that'll put this in perspective for you. The U.S. Navy, Marines, and an Army are going to take Okinawa, the first of the Japanese islands. Around that island, Okinawa, which is like 50 miles by 10 miles, around that island, wait for it, are 3,000 U.S. Navy warships. 3,000 U.S. Navy warships. Just think about the scale of this for a minute. There are embarked on these ships 700,000 troops, and they're funneling ashore, and things are looking pretty good and going pretty well, and they're bogged down, they're fighting it, and then the Japanese launch these kamikaze waves, like the one that killed your grandfather, and over the course of that 60-day battle, here's the second number I'll leave you with. There are 1,600 kamikaze attacks against those ships, and it kills 6,000 Navy sailors. Ashore, wait for it, ashore on Okinawa, the casualties are far less than that. The U.S. Navy suffers the highest casualty rate, 6,000 killed. I think there were 4,000 Army and 3,000 Marines. The Navy lost 6,000 sailors at sea, including your grandfather.
Wow. Imagine that happening today.
And the scale, again, the scale of it, it's just, it's hard to wrap your mind around. We had hundreds of aircraft carriers in those days. Today we have 11.
Wow.
Yeah, they're a lot better, a lot bigger, but
Yeah. Oh my
300
goodness.
aircraft carriers. Think about that for a minute.
Wow. There's a book called The Danger's Hour, or Danger's Hour. Last name of the author is Kennedy. And it follows the building of the Bunker Hill, and then also what's happening with the kamikaze one of the kamikaze who's going to hit it that day.
Oh, that's interesting.
Almost sunk it, took it out of the war. There's a whole story about how they kept that ship from sinking.
Story.
It limps its way back. I think it ends up going back to Washington State, I think, for repairs, doesn't make it back into the war. After that, the war ends before it finishes its repairs. But incredible story. Incredible story. Oof. Yeah. Imagine if that had gone down. I mean, just
oh my God,
incredible story right there. And some of these other names, Admiral Halsey, like.
Well, people tend to think of him, of course, as Bull Halsey.
Yes.
He hated that. It's a nickname. It just got hung on him somehow. He was always Bill Halsey, kind of a football player, tough guy. He gets his wings. He's the oldest man ever to get those wings of gold, like your grandfather got them in his 20s, maybe. Bill Halsey gets him in his 50s.
Wow.
And yeah, think about that for a minute. It's like, like me going down to Pensacola. I don't think so.
Hey, maybe.
And so it's he's beloved by his troops. He's quick with the line. He's very charismatic. That's all the good news. The bad news is he's impetuous. He's prone to mistakes on the battlefield. He tunes out his subordinates if he doesn't like. He's complicated. And I think the portrait of him in the Restless Wave is a very favorable one. By the time you see him again in the sequel, he's at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which has a very different storyline. So I'd like to think we have a pretty complete picture of Fleet Admiral, 5-star Admiral Bill Halsey.
Right. Is that in The Hunt for Red October? Is that in the movie? Is that when Ramius is talking with Jack Ryan, and are they discussing Halsey in that? Do you remember?
They are. In
the middle of the battle, and he said
exactly.
Halsey acted stupidly or something like that. And
he did, and he did, and this is forever within the U.S. Navy. There's a debate about two admirals, Halsey. Impetuous, charismatic, never walked by a camera he didn't stop and give a quip to, fierce warfighter, or Admiral Spruance, calm, intellectual, quiet, thoughtful. Spruance won the Battle of Midway Bill Halsey almost lost the Battle of Lady Gulf. And, there are qualities of both of them that I deeply admire and I tried to emulate in the course of my life and career. But there's a little bit of Team Halsey or Team Spruance going on out there in the Navy. I'm kind of a Team Spruance guy, but there's a lot to like about Bill Halsey.
Yeah. Is it Battle of Leyte Gulf? Is that the one where the Japanese make the mistake that essentially saves us? Is that, or I remember there's one of these battles and that might be the one. Okay.
Yes, it is.
And going way back in the memory banks here.
You're doing great. I'll tell it to you in 30 seconds. So Halsey makes this terrible mistake and takes all the battleships, all the carriers, all the cruisers, and they steam off to the north. This is what Ramius is talking about in Hunt for Red October. They steam off to the north and they leave completely undefended Douglas MacArthur's army that's about to invade the Philippines. Only thing left are like a handful of little piddly destroyers, a couple of light aircraft carriers that don't really have any planes on them. Now the Japanese battle fleet shows up. It's battleships, it's cruisers. They could have obliterated that invasion force. They were naked, undefended. Those destroyers charged the Japanese battle line. They were all sunk. All of them were killed. But the Japanese were fooled into thinking that they were just the forward pickets. And therefore, the Japanese battle fleet turned around and ran. There's an amazing book about that. It's a great title, The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors.
That's it.
By James Hornfisher. Yeah. Last Stand of the Tin. That's what you're thinking of, I think.
That's it right there.
Amazing book.
Incredible. And Yamamoto is mentioned in here, of course. And what was your impression of him? And what did you learn about some of these guys as you were doing this research? Is it anything new? Because obviously you're so well read, so well versed, so much experience. And did you learn anything new now that you took a breath and decided to research some of this, or maybe check some things that you thought you knew previously?
Yeah.
And then incorporate them into a book.
One is, in fact, Yamamoto, who his knowledge of America is very deep, the United States. He speaks English, very sophisticated. Many of the Japanese admirals and generals, by the way, had studied in the United States, been assigned here. They knew what they were getting into. And Yamamoto is one who tried in the councils of Japan to advise against, for example, this strike on Pearl Harbor. But once the emperor made a decision, he had been pushed by the army claque back in Tokyo. There was no coming back. What I learned watching Yamamoto, what he taught me was, don't make the mistake of hating your enemies too much. It clouds your judgment. That's a pretty good lesson. And if you want another echo of that, by the way, it's in the greatest book of leadership ever written, which of course is The Godfather by Mario Puzo. That's also the Don's advice to Santino, his headstrong son. Don't make the mistake of hating your enemies too much. It clouds your judgment. That's Yamamoto.
It certainly does. And I think it inhibits you from being able to really put yourself into their shoes in order to anticipate next moves and figure out how they would adapt to their vision of what they're probably doing to you.
100%, 100% accurate. And by the way, to pull this into today's world, that would be my advice to the Israelis. The Israelis are pounding away, and they should, at Hamas and Hezbollah and Houthis and striking everywhere. I would say to my Israeli friends, and I have, Iran's a big country. It's 3 times the size of Texas, has a population of 90 million. To my Israeli friends, I would say, kill those proxies. Be careful about Iran. Don't make the mistake of hating them too much and let it cloud your judgment about what's militarily real on a battlefield.
Interesting. Very interesting. And let's talk about Nimitz a little bit while we're here.
Sure. The greatest admiral of all time. And he had all the qualities you want to really admire. And he's kind of this mashup of Halsey and Spruance. He's intellectual, he's smart, but he's not, he's very operational. He's also a very aggressive warfighter. He knows what he wants to go after. And everybody loves Nimitz. And the snapshot of him that I'll give you, Jack, is Pearl Harbor attack happens. The 4-star admiral is disgraced. Husband Kimmel was his name. He's fired. And so Ernest King, the chief of the Navy, reaches out for Chester Nimitz, sends him out to Pearl, and Chester Nimitz takes command of the Pacific Fleet, not in the way he dreamed he one day would in his choker white, standing on the deck of a beautiful battleship. They're all sunk. He can't even get his whites cleaned up. He takes command of the Pacific Fleet on the deck of a submarine, because that's all that's still there. The carriers are still out at sea. And so he's there in his rumpled khakis. The smell of cordite and smoke and fuel and death is in the air. He takes command, and he just resolutely, calmly, methodically takes apart the Japanese. It's a very impressive sequence of 4 years of leadership. Nimitz is the most complete officer of whom I know.
Wow. That actually sounds more appropriate more appropriate way to take command at that time than in the whites elsewhere.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's a good example, and you know this from your military history, the general or the admiral that you start a war with very seldom is the one you want to finish the war with. Think of Lincoln in the Civil War. He goes through
general after general after general
after general till he finds his general, Ulysses S. Grant.
Exactly.
And Nimitz, we found him early, but believe me, you would not have wanted his predecessor, husband Kimmel, who was right out of central casting, 6'4", great head of executive hair, beautiful, looked like an admiral, talked like an admiral, very smooth.
Ooh.
Nimitz was the guy, and we're lucky we found him early in the war.
Amazing. And then before I let you go, we have a couple more minutes here, but a quick touch point on Guadalcanal.
Sure.
What did you learn anything new about Guadalcanal, or was that something that you've studied so much and is so ingrained in your experience and history? And tell us a little bit about Guadalcanal.
Yeah, Guadalcanal is one of the early amphibious pivotal battles where the Marines go ashore. And frankly, my beloved surface Navy, so the cruisers and the destroyers, our job, the surface Navy, is the naval gunfire support and to knock down the Japanese, who are Navy, which is trying to resupply the Japanese troops on the island. What I learned in the course of writing the book was how important the new idea of a communication combat center in each of those destroyers was. Until then, Jack, we fought these ships from the bridge. The captain would go up there. It's kind of like you think of in the movies with his binoculars and fire over there, fire over there. What we learned in combat the hard way, after a bunch of our ships got sunk by the Japanese, you needed to fight the ship from inside the ship, where you could see the radars, you could see the sonars, you could hear all the communications, you could fuse it all together and direct the movements of the ship. So that's where we in the surface Navy learned that the captain goes down to the Combat Information Center. You send your second in command, the executive officer, up to the bridge. That all stemmed from the Battle of Guadalcanal.
Wow. Yeah, I just love this book. I think it's gonna resonate with so many people. People are gonna learn so much. They're gonna be waiting for that next one. Let's talk about Petty Officer Dory Miller. We've talked about a lot of officers. We've talked about a lot of admirals here, but Petty Officer Dory Miller. Let's finish on in the enlisted ranks.
What a great one to wrap it up with, because Dory Miller's the most likable character, I think, in the entire book in a lot of ways. He's African American. Big guy, kind of 6'3", 240 pounds, kind of 4% body fat. He comes out of West Texas in the 30s. There's not much future for like a big black guy in the U.S. Navy or anywhere else, but he wants to get out of Texas, joins the Navy. The only thing the Navy lets African Americans do in this stage is be mess cooks. And so he becomes a mess cook, and he's a damn good mess cook. And he becomes, by the way, you'll like this, the boxing champion of the Pacific Fleet, heavyweight boxing champion. And he is beloved by everybody he comes in contact with. Now we come to Pearl Harbor. He's assigned to a battleship. His commanding officers up on the bridge. The battle starts. Dory Miller's battle station is in the wardroom, the officer's mess. His job literally is to make donuts so that when the battle's over, the officers can come down and have some donuts. Dory Miller says, F that. I'm going up there where the fighting is. He goes up to the bridge. His captain is hit. He helps evacuate his captain from the bridge. And then here's the punchline. He goes down to the deck of the ship. There's an anti-aircraft gun there. He straps it on. He's never done anything like this. He starts shooting it, and he shoots down probably 2 Japanese Zeros. It's an amazing act of initiative and courage and military competence and inspirational leadership. It's just an amazing story. And I'd encourage people to see the movie if you haven't, Pearl Harbor, Ben Affleck's greatest movie, maybe his only good movie, but Ben Affleck's movie, and it's stolen by Cuba Gooding Jr., who plays Dory Miller. And so there's good news and bad news. The good news is he's recognized by the Navy, gets a Navy Cross, nation's second highest award for valor in combat. Admiral Nimitz pins it on Dory Miller. That's all good news. Bad news. A year later in the war, he is sunk at sea on his next ship, and he dies. He doesn't survive the Second World War. That's bad news. Here's the good news and the ending of the story. A couple years ago, the Department of the Navy announced that our next nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, 100,000 tons. These are named after George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, T.R. Roosevelt, President Ford, President Bush. They're named after American presidents. The next one, it's going to be named USS Petty Officer Dory Miller. That's really good news in so many dimensions.
Wow. Amazing. Gosh, I love that story. And you brought up battleships here at the end. Our last battleship, I believe, was decommissioned in the early 90s. Is that right?
They were. Yeah, there were 4 of those World War II battleships, New Jersey, Wisconsin, Iowa, one other one. Those 4 are all now museum ships. So if you want to go see a battleship, the most famous one is the 4th. You've been on it, Missouri. Yeah, out of Pearl Harbor. And by the way, at Pearl Harbor are the sunken remains of Arizona, USS Arizona battleship, sunk at Pearl Harbor. 2,000 sailors are still inside it. The start of World War II. Right next to it is USS Missouri, where the Japanese signed the surrender documents. It's the end of the war. So Arizona, Missouri. But if you want to go see a battleship, you can see Missouri in Pearl Harbor, New Jersey's up in Camden, New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia. Iowa, I think, is in Norfolk, and Wisconsin is in Long Beach, California. Go see a battleship. It'll bring the Restless Wave alive. Those were magnificent machines of war. Magnificent machines of war.
I wish I know that we have more technically advanced ships now, but there's something about parking a battleship or two off the coast of a country and pivoting those guns in that direction that really sends a different message than just parking a big gray ship out there where you can't really see that sort of thing. It's just it's a different visual if you're on the receiving end, I think.
100% with you. And each one of those barrels, and there are 9 of those barrels, 3 triple turrets, can fire a shell the size of a car 30 miles. I mean, those are magnificent machines of war.
I think we need to bring them back. I mean, there's a place for them. There's a place for sending that kind of a message.
I'm with you.
Amazing. And I also encourage everyone, to go to Pearl Harbor, do those tours, spend some time there, especially with your children, and start it there, obviously in Pearl, finish it up on the Missouri there. You get and then there's the Bowfin right there, which is a submarine that you get to walk on, and realize that in World War II, how small these things were. It's absolutely incredible to walk through that. I did it as a kid, and I took my family back there. I've done it a couple times now, and then go to the Punch Bowl and see the names on those walls, all the missing in action, see all those graves, walk it, because it tells the whole history of World War II up there. It's absolutely stunning, so powerful. But that should be a pilgrimage that every U.S. citizen makes. It's an amazing
pilgrimage. And by the way, those diesel submarines had the highest casualty rate of any branch of the U.S. Armed Forces.
Wow. Incredible.
Full stop. Yep.
Incredible. And then before I let you go, I have to ask you about Dark Forest Key in Florida, which I don't think is a real place. Is that right?
It's not. It's not. But I'm a native Floridian, and there was no way I wasn't going to have Dark Forest Key, because the Dark Forest is an allusion to Dante's Inferno. And there's a few little Easter eggs in the book, Jack, that kind of allude to the fact that World War II in the Pacific was an inferno. You felt like you were descending into these concentric circles of hell. And if you'll recall, at the beginning of Dante's Inferno, the narrator talks about wandering into this dark forest. And that, of course, is Dark Forest Key at the beginning of The Restless Wave.
That's why I had to ask you about it. And here it is, Restless Wave right here. Once again, thank you for writing this. Thank you for all the other books that you have written, your service to this nation, everything you've done since, passing on those lessons for everyone out there. They should go and add all your books to their libraries. There's so much wisdom in those pages. But the latest is The Restless Wave. And I'm so glad to hear that there will be 5 of these, not just one like I thought, and not just one more like I thought. So I'm so happy to hear that. And I want to, thank you so much for your friendship and being here today, and everything you've done and continue to do for the country.
And Jack, I'll just return it and say thank you for your service as a fellow sailor, a Navy SEAL, a fellow writer. I couldn't be prouder of my friendship with you, and I look forward to making sure your grandfather is in the sequel to The Restless Wave. I'll look for that email.
Wow. That's amazing. That means so much to me. Thank you. And,
thanks, Jack.
Take care. We'll talk again soon.
See you, sailor.
Take care. Until the next time, take care out there. Stay safe. Be strong. Keep fighting.